You're listening to the WannaBes Mobcast.
Today we have a podcast episode with Steve Pohl. He is the engineer that made the CleverLever and started Midwest Mountain Engineering. We have both used his levers now for well over a year, and
they're freaking amazing.
At least 5 people who run them, and it's changed my riding. Amazing product, really good support, small business based here in the U.S. It's really
There's
cool.
nothing not to like. So
yeah,
we're thrilled to have him on, and we want to hear how the lever works and all the tips and tricks about how to use it. So we'll dive in.
Yeah. Steve Pohl, everybody.
We super appreciate you coming on, and we're excited to chat. So.
Yeah,
I'm glad to be here.
Really happy with it. So, was it yesterday? Day before yesterday? I did like 100 double blips. We have a little track here in the backyard, and running the CleverLever, I was like, by the end of it, my fingers weren't even sore. It was, awesome. Like running it straight for a whole ride. It's awesome to not have that, because I jumped on my trials bike today to go for a little ride, and it doesn't have the CleverLever on it, and it has a broken clutch lever. And every time I get back on my trials bike, I can't believe how hard the lever pull is compared to my KTM with the CleverLever on it. So
sure.
Yeah.
Well, if you want a training methodology, the lever gives you an opportunity to basically run with ankle weights. So if the adjustments stay with the lever. So whether it's the stock lever or my lever. So if you find a 5-mile loop, run it with the OEM lever, and you get all pumped up, throw my lever on, and you feel the difference, and you start thinking about it. You come back around, throw the original lever back on, you'll be hating that thing all the way around. And it just focuses you to think about your hand and how you're using it and how you can't use it, how you would want to use it. And so it's just a very natural way to do some training where you're not, okay, I got to remember to double blip, and that kind of thing. So it just sharpens your focus. And the more you do that, the more you'll realize how you use the lever and right and wrong, and how you can't when you're physically done. So
that's a really interesting idea. I haven't tried that exactly, but I did ride back to back on a bike that didn't have the CleverLever recently. We had a CR500 out with us doing hill climbs, and it's almost shockingly hard to pull the clutch after you've been riding around for a year with a CleverLever. So I could see that being an interesting training.
We've become weak.
Yeah, we're wimps, whatever.
That's one way to look at it. But so in the sales of the lever, my demographic is older people that need the force reduction. That's really easy to understand. What a professional rider, or a pro, or somebody in the A class, B class, they think they don't need a younger person. They have the recovery time that makes them think that they don't need the lever. They don't get arm pumps, so why do they need the force reduction? But you just naturally slow down the aggressiveness that you use the lever to match your level of endurance. And so if your endurance level is low, then you're going to clutch less aggressively. So even though you don't need it for arm pump purposes, you can be more aggressive. And the more aggressive you are in using that clutch, the better control you have, or in the corners, because everybody can go straight and go fast. But it's in the cornering where you really make the time. Mm-hmm. So
that makes a lot of sense, actually. And I've noticed that we've done that. We've gotten a lot more clutch control, and we use the clutch more because of that. So I like what you're saying about going straight. I saw on Facebook years ago a joke that straight roads are for fast cars and curvy roads are for fast drivers. So something like that.
I like that.
Here.
Yeah, I like that.
So maybe we should
do an actual intro and start.
We just jumped into the middle. I was just curious about your background. I know I read through your website and noticed that you have a background as a writer, but I think you're an engineer by trade. I'm assuming how this kind of came about. You kind of merged the two of those, but I'd love to hear your backstory.
Sure. I started out college as an art major, realized I'm going to make a lot more money in engineering. And I always liked sciences. So I decided to go that route. And along the way, I did mostly automation design. So machines that built products for other companies, medical devices and things like that. So that's what I did through most of my career up until the lever consumed me.
That's kind of a cool backstory, really. I mean, that I think that level of engineering is really applicable to a ton of things these days, and probably more and more so, I'd imagine.
Yeah, everything can be improved. I'm sure we'll talk about more about my friends and my experience riding. But I'm an engineer. I'm not a mechanic. The difference is a mechanic likes to fix things. I think they should have been designed to work properly the first time. I hate fixing things. But so yeah, that's there's a difference between me and my buddy who's a mechanic, and his bikes are pristine. Mine are modified.
That's pretty funny. Yeah, John has a background in automotive mechanics.
Yeah, I was a
his
diesel
bike is not
mechanic.
pristine, so I don't know.
Oh man, it is not. I ride too much for it to be pristine.
Well, and that's part of the problem. Yeah, it's I have a fender torn off of mine right now. It's just, when do you find the time to go fix it? I'd rather ride it. So
Right. Yeah. Well, the thing my buddy hates about not keeping his bike in pristine condition is that, if you break down in the trail, you're done riding until you can fix something and cobble it and get it back and so on. So he makes sure that through the process of cleaning his bike, he touches every nut and bolt. And he's famous for wandering around looking at people's bikes and saying, "Oh, your lever is about ready to fall off because that Kickstarter lever, because the screw's loose." And he just knows everything. He told me once, "It sounds like you have a flat tire." Sounds like, yeah, right. I checked, and sure enough, I had a flat tire. And I'm like, how in the world does he hear that? But he probably walked around my bike, and when I wasn't looking, and said, "That looks a little low." Felt it, sure enough, and then waited until I went and rode around the trail, and then came back and said, "Yeah, sounds low."
It's pretty funny about the kickstand. John and I have had that experience. We have a couple clips on Instagram from a while back where he actually had a kickstand literally fall off, and we threw one on from a beta onto a KTM. So the joke is that the beta is on the trail to be a parts donor. So anyway, we've definitely been there.
Yeah. No.
So tell us the story of the company. How did it get going? How'd you get into this?
Well, sure. I took a consulting position with Hewlett-Packard, and because there was a tax reciprocity issue between Minnesota and Wisconsin, and I lived in Wisconsin and Hewlett-Packard was here in the cities, I had to become a consultant and have the billing process and pay my own taxes. And so I needed a company and a company name, and I live in the Midwest, love the Midwest, like the lakes and lake activity in the summer. But wintertime, I love the mountains, skiing out in Colorado, Montana. So I just kind of combined the two Midwest mountains. My ideal place would be a house on a river by a lake in the mountains,
on a ski slope. Right?
On a ski slope, yeah, exactly.
Well, that's pretty cool. And then I guess, how did the lever come into that concept?
Okay, that's a story. We were going out to Wyoming to ride in the basin area. And back then you could pretty much ride everywhere. The DNR wasn't concerned about it. And we rode all over the basin for years. But it was about our second trip out there, I think. We were getting ready to go. We took the bikes for a weekend ride, shake them down, make sure everything's ready. And I fried a bearing. And I was going on a business trip, and I was coming back on Thursday, and we were leaving Friday. And so my buddy had to rebuild my engine for me. And he's
it's a good friend.
Yep, he is a very good friend. So he fixed it for me, and we went riding, and my clutch on that trip was horrible. Turns out that when he put the spline shaft in for the Pohl that actuates the clutch, it was off one spline or maybe two. And so instead of pulling from below dead center to above dead center, it was pulling from 45 degrees above to straight, which is really tough to get the clutch to disengage. So I came back home and took a look at it, and we had been trying all kinds of things to come up with a product that we could design and build and sell. And we tried a whole bunch of screwy things, but so we're kind of looking for opportunities. And so I realized that shaft was, I didn't realize it was in the wrong position. Looking at it from a mechanic standpoint, I didn't realize it was in the wrong position. From a design standpoint, I thought, well, that's not right. It should have been designed differently. So I didn't take the engine apart to fix that. I made a device that went on the end, and it made the, and this was a Yamaha YZ250, and it made the clutch just soft and smooth and real easy to manipulate. And so I started making stamping dies, and I finally found a product that was going to work. It was in the cover. It you'd never know it's there. You'd never need any maintenance. And I went to put them on another bike and found it doesn't fit. It doesn't work because that shaft is in the correct orientation. And so that kind of ended that. Then Jerry came down with psoriatic arthritis, and this is years later, and we just started thinking, how can we do the same thing with the hydraulics on a KTM, because we had switched from Yamaha to KTM, and came up with the clutch lever, and it just taken off all by itself. It's been great for the last 14 years.
I like that.
I can't believe we only really just kind of discovered the CleverLever.
I know, we've been suffering for so long.
Yeah, I mean, we've both been riding for well over 10 years now, and it's just one of those kind of hidden gems that we didn't know about, which is surprising considering how much stuff we buy for our bikes.
Yeah, constantly. Can you take just a minute and sort of explain the physics of the lever? How does it actually work? What is it doing?
Sure. It's a teeter-totter. So you pull on one side of the teeter-totter and it lifts the other end. And all I did was move the fulcrum. There's a little bit more to that the patent on the lever covers because of the way that lever fits, or the teeter-totter fits into the housing. And but basically that's what I did. I changed the fulcrum, and that changed everything. Prior to that, I think the manufacturers have the design that they have because it isn't a preference of position adjustment on the OEM lever. It anywhere you have it set, you put the lever on, it'll disengage the clutch. So it's got twice the throw necessary to do the job. So my lever uses the full throw to do the full disengagement without extra movement.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I was going to ask why they don't put them stock on there, because it seems like that's a kind of a pain point for just about everyone.
Well, the thing that I offer probably more than anything is personal contact, warranty work, or really help setting it up. It is more technical than the stock lever, because both endpoints endpoints of the stroke are functional. You have to adjust them to fit the bike. And so an OEM could do the same thing, but then they'd be dealing with all these customers who can't get it right. They fried their clutch, they're unhappy, and the manufacturer and dealers don't want to deal with that. So, buying it from me, the best part of the job is talking to the customers, hearing their stories, and getting their invites to go ride places that are exotic.
I don't think you can call this area exotic, but we'd love to have you come ride with us. So just consider that a standing invite.
Okay, sure. Well,
so then the next question that sort of comes up is, I'm starting to wonder if I haven't taken the time to adjust mine right. You're making it sound I threw it on there and played with it just a little bit, and it's been working great. But I wonder if I've missed something. So maybe talk through the adjustment process. And now this is just me learning here.
Sure. Yeah. So the instructions are come in the package, and they're very specific.
I read parts of them.
Yeah. That's the trouble, is most people think it's the same as the OEM, and they just throw the instructions.
We're all know-it-alls.
Yeah. And I hate to say it, but mechanics are the worst. A customer buys a bike. They say, I want this lever on it. I had it on my other bike. It works great. Throw it on it. They expect that the mechanic is going to do it right. If they're not mechanically inclined, capable of doing it themselves, then They just get on the bike and go ride and think everything's right. And the worst case is not having the free play adjustment correctly. So if there's free play, you know that the lever is fully disengaged itself from pushing on the piston. If you're pushing on the piston, you're riding the clutch.
Right.
And so if you don't have free play adjusted properly, you can be riding the clutch. You won't feel it in first and second gear. You'll take off just fine. You get into the high power transfer conditions like climbing a hill or in deep sand or something, and your clutch will be slipping, and then it starts slipping to the point where you start noticing it, and then then most people, especially if in a race, they want to get to the end of the race. It's hard to get out of that competitive mode, and they just give it more throttle, and it slips more and burns, and then they're done.
Yep.
So
I've burned clutches, not because of your lever, but I'm famous for breaking clutches somehow.
Yeah. But that's actually the second adjustment. So the first adjustment sets how much free play you're going to need, or how much lever swing you're going to need, because it takes a set amount of lever swing in order to go from fully disengaged to fully engaged. So you want to find the point in the assembly where the clutch lever, when it's fully squeezed, has just disengaged the clutch so that there's no drag. You can sit on the bike with the clutch, pop it in first gear. All bikes will lurch as the clutch plates find their fluid dynamic position as the fluid's flowing around between the plates. And you have it so that you squeeze the clutch lever, you pop it in gear, it sits there just fine. And if the first time you do that, there is no drag, then you're either perfect or you're disengaging too much. The more disengagement, the more length you have on the piston rod, the more the lever has to swing away from the bar, and you want to minimize that. So you shorten the piston rod so you get a little bit of drag when you squeeze lever the bar and pop it in gear. When you find that point at which the drag just starts and you dial it a quarter or an eighth of a turn, and the drag goes away, that's where you want to be. And then you've got that adjustment correct. And then the free play is real simple. If it's sloppy, it's got a little bit of free play, you can just snug that up. Careful not to go too far because it's very light touch at that point. The piston has reached the pressure port where the fluid's transferring between the reservoir and the line. And so as you adjust the free play, it's easy to go into that and close off that port. And then you lose the self-adjusting nature of the hydraulics. So that's what you do, is you make sure there's just a tiny amount of free play, and then you're golden. Everything's good. You got it adjusted right, and Loctite everything in that position, and you'll never have to adjust it again.
I hadn't thought about the Loctite part. I rarely adjust mine, but I noticed the screw can drift just a tiny bit. And so once in a while, I'll take, an eighth of a turn or something in or out to sort of keep it in place. But
so we Loctite it at assembly, primarily because if we don't, then people don't, and then they lose it within 10 minutes of their first try.
Okay, so it's Loctited from the factory. Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, so right. I haven't added anything, but okay.
The problem with that is when we Loctite it at assembly, the package can sit on a dealer's shelf or on my shelf for a long time, and it gets progressively harder. And Loctite is kind of variable in how much it locks up. So it's best to apply some fresh, but so people will adjust it, and the Loctite will be good for the first few adjustments. But if you're going one direction, you're going to be fine. If you go both directions a bunch of times, then you're breaking down that Loctite, and pretty soon it's like it's not there. And so if you're constantly doing it, you'll find you're doing it more and more until it eventually falls out. So you get it adjusted so it's right, and then Loctite it there, and you won't have to touch it again. You can change your clutch plates. The self-adjusting nature of the hydraulics accounts for any variation in thickness.
Yep.
The adjustments don't. So once it's adjusted literally for years, you won't have to touch it. If something happens, the lever didn't change, say you start slipping or dragging or something, usually dragging because you can't get enough disengagement, that would be air in the line. It's either that or you've warped your clutch plates and you need more disengagement distance, separation distance in the clutch pack in order for it to not drag. So if something changes, you got to do some maintenance, not shorten the piston rod or or adjust it.
That makes a ton of sense. I actually feel better now with that explanation because I think I probably did do it right by accident. That's the thing. It's been working fine, so I've been really happy with it. But it's interesting. I think we talk about the CleverLever quite a bit on, we've posted about it and think done an install video and some other stuff. One of the questions that we frequently get both from riders, on the trail and on social media is, I tried the CleverLever and I can't get it to, it's either slipping or dragging, and I'm in one or the other and I can't seem to find like a sweet spot. My assumption is maybe they need to try a little harder to get that adjusted properly. Based on what you just said, I think that's probably true. But any response to that kind of a comment, you probably see the same thing. Yeah,
all the time. One other aspect of the lever is the temperature of the oil, and that affects the adjustment. So if you adjust the lever when the bike's cold, you'll dial in enough disengagement to disengage the clutch with the higher viscosity of the oil. When the oil gets hot, then you're going to be disengaging a lot more than necessary because of the fluid dynamics. So you got to warm up the bike first, and sitting it on a stand and letting it idle for 10 minutes, the jug gets hot, but the clutch doesn't because you're not slipping the clutch.
Yep.
So if you do one or two motocross style starts, you'll warm that up in seconds. Yep. And so that's the first thing that people do. They adjust it for a temperature, and then they throw the bike, and they're fine with it, and they throw the bike in the garage, and the next morning they go to move it, and they'd left it in gear, and they go to push it, and they grab the clutch lever, and the rear wheel drags, and they start adjusting it all over the place, and forgot to warm it up that time, and then I get a call and have to explain everything.
Yep.
And then we hear all kinds of stories, so it's a good thing. But so that's the first thing is, and I'd mentioned that mechanics are generally the worst. Well, you're setting up a bike, you got 10 bikes to set up that day, and the customers are, okay, the bike came in, how soon am I going to get it? And so the mechanics are motivated to get the bikes, throw the lever on, get the bike going, and get it to the customer. They don't go out and ride it for 10 minutes to warm it up. And again, the customer is thinking the mechanic set it up right, and the mechanic is thinking the customer is responsible for this aftermarket part, and they're going to get it set up right.
Yeah.
So that's the kind of issue I have with adjusting it in temperature. If you adjust it so the disengagement is longer than necessary, again, you have more reach distance. So then you try and shorten the reach distance by taking out free play and then basically riding the clutch, and you're happy at first until you burn the clutch. So you gotta read the directions. It says what you need to do there. Read and understand. Gals are the best. They pay attention to the instructions, and they'll call first and clarify, and then they'll do the install and adjustment.
I love it. Yeah, I think like I said, we're all arrogant know-it-alls here. That's been my experience too. Like, I don't touch it, and I've told other people that kind of basically that story. Don't touch it. Go ride it for half an hour or whatever. Hit the trails. I like to go try to pull some wheelies or climb a hill or something because I slip the clutch doing that anyway. And you're right, that'll heat it up properly. And I wasn't thinking through the why of that, but I have had that experience. So I appreciate the explanation behind that. There's
one trick that can help a lot, and I think for the most part it gives them a little confidence to try a little harder that something might improve it. And that is if there's air in the line, it can be difficult to bleed adequately. And if you squeeze the clutch lever to the bar and zip tie it squeezed, the pressure of the fluid tends to get the micro bubbles that are left in the line to agglomerate better together. Mm-hmm. And float up the line and get out. That's my explanation.
Okay.
I'd love an expert on that to weigh in because it works great. It works especially good on a brake lever because you can clamp it tight against the rotor. You're only clamping against the clutch pack springs. And so you're limited in how much pressure you can give it. So you give it overnight, you give it time. and that can bleed out an additional air. The bubbles just float up to the reservoir. When you start working the lever, they end up going out that pressure port into the reservoir. It's a really easy thing to do. I get a lot of comments that it's worked for them. I don't fully understand why it works, but I've done that for years on brake levers. When your brakes get soft, that's a good way to get them firm.
That's cool. I'd never even thought to do that before. I mean, I've always just taken to bleeding all the fluid through the system
Pump it
enough
like a
times.
maniac, right?
Yeah, and then you get, firm up eventually.
Except on your brake last time, we had to tip the bike sideways to get the...
Yeah.
Anyway.
So with the CleverLever, should you expect to see more clutch wear? I'm thinking of it, the way that the CleverLever is set up is for you to be able to take advantage of the entire throw of the clutch lever from the clutch being fully engaged to fully disengaged. And there's not extra play. So if you pull it in further, it's not going to further disengage the clutch plates to a point that's unnecessary. So if it allows you to better modulate the clutch contact and your power to the rear wheel, which means that you're more fully utilizing that power directly through your powertrain. And if you're doing that, it means you're slipping your clutch more than you otherwise would from, if your contact band is 10% of the throw as opposed to 100% of the throw, there's that contact patch is going to be much smaller. And it seems like you would just slip your clutch more naturally just from the fact that you're able to better modulate the power. Is that something that you're finding is happening with the people that you talk to?
Certainly, the more you use the clutch, the more the clutch plates will see wear. I mean, a motocrosser is going to change his clutch plates pretty frequently compared to an enduro rider or the casual rider. So the clutch lever does allow you to be more aggressive, and so you will wear your clutch plates faster, but not a real measurable amount. I mean, it's not like going to be a maintenance issue that you've never had before, and suddenly you're changing your clutch plates all the time to the tune of $300-400. So yes, there would be more wear the more aggressive you are, and that's what the lever allows you to do, but not to any extent that you're going to notice that kind of wear.
I mean, clutches are made to be slipped.
Yeah, we encourage people to get into their clutch anyway, because that's how you ride well. Even on big power climbs and things, especially riding a two-stroke, you've got to slip the clutch to keep the engine revved and whatever's going on, control traction. If you're not slipping it, you're not riding right. So
right.
I mean, other than the fact that it reduces the clutch lever pull, the amount of pressure you need, it should also help you. I mean, I feel like it's helped me immensely with my slow wheelie practice. I feel like I'm able to better keep the front wheel up in the air as opposed to before it was either up, looped out, and I'm underneath the bike, or like I'm missing it altogether and I never got the wheel off the ground.
It feels like a stock clutch to me. Like when I very first rode with the CleverLever, it felt like the stock clutch was like on and off, whereas your lever has like an actual contact patch that you can sort of feel. So yeah, I think like
it does take some getting used to. I think
the first ride was interesting.
Yeah,
you feel like you're going so far away.
Yeah. No, I think it does make the clutch feel a little bit softer. The OEM lever is more switch-like. You move it just a little bit, and it goes from disengaged to fully engaged, and so it can be harder to control. You need to use more brake in the wheelie to prevent you from going over. So I don't know that makes it harder or easier to use. It depends on the situation. Some trials guys like to have that burst of speed instantly. But a lot of trials guys like the lever for that very reason you're talking about, having the ability to modulate. I think part of it is the grip that you have on your handlebars is going to make a difference too. So if you're hanging on with your pinky and your ring finger, and you start going over backwards, it's hard to hang on. And if you've got a one finger lever going, then you've got significantly more grip strength. And you won't have that feeling that you're going to fall off the back end of the bike.
That makes sense. Do you have is there any I don't know, average or typical way that people use like a one finger? Because I know some people said use the middle finger. I use my index finger and just move the lever way in on the bar. And with the CleverLever, it's light enough I can get away with that. But what do you hear from people in terms of like which finger they're using or how much of the hand?
Well, it's all over the board. The guys that do the middle finger pull, they have an issue in that the pointer finger is going to get crushed.
Yeah.
Because the lever squeezes close to the bar. But yeah, it's all over. Beginners will use four fingers, and they're never pulling hard enough that they're going to lose their grip on the handlebar.
Right.
So yeah, there is no sweet spot. People have preferences, and when someone doesn't like the lever, it's usually because of that kind of thing. They're used to a middle finger pull and they don't want to change it. It only comes an issue when you squeeze all the way to the bar. And when you're modulating, you don't crush fingers, but when you're coming to a stop or something like that. But yeah, it's all over the place.
That makes sense.
One of the things I really liked about the lever was that it came stock as a short lever.
Just gonna say
and I've always bought stock levers, trimmed them up,
cut them and sand them.
Yeah, cut them and sand them, make them short one finger levers. And I don't know, some people think I'm crazy for doing that, but that was the thing I liked about the CleverLever. And I was kind of wondering what the thinking was when you were designing it. Why not go with like a full 4-finger pull lever?
Yeah, I did the same thing. I cut my levers off at that breakaway notch.
Yep.
And didn't know it, but that violates the AMA rules. Now, as a C rider, when I first started, or a B rider, even an A rider, you're probably not going to get called on it. But if you win a race and someone wants to take your spot, they can say, well, it doesn't meet AMA rules. You have to have a half-inch diameter ball on the end of the lever. So I wanted a shorter lever. I wanted it shorter than it is, but my buddy who I did this with, Jerry, he wanted it longer, so we compromised. And then instead of making a half-inch ball on the OEM levers, they went with a 3/4 ball. I don't know why they made that big knob hanging out there, but the half-inch diameter is what's required. So when I first started making lever, it just was a blade with a round end. That was thin. It just had a little kick to the end. And then the customer called up and said, can't use your lever because it violates the rules. And he pointed out the regulation. And so I had to change the design a little bit there. But we compromised on the length, my buddy and I, on what we thought it ought to be. And I think where it landed was the right way. Longer wouldn't have been a 50% force reduction, and shorter would have been a little too difficult to adjust properly.
When it comes to using the number of fingers that you're used to, whether it's 1 or 2, I mean, you can just move the clutch master cylinder on.
Ours way in on the bars.
I only barely get the end of my index finger on the end of it, so I feel like that's manageable. You can just move it around.
Well, I like that the lever is fairly wide too. I don't know. I've never measured it. I don't know if it's actually wider than stock or if it's got a different profile to it, but I love that. I'm wondering what your thinking was there.
Well, if you measure the thickness of the OEM lever at its fattest, it's almost exactly the same. So it's more of a perception because the end of the lever where you use it is thinner. And on the OEM lever, mine, it was a manufacturing issue that if I were to change the profile of the width, then I've got 2 more machine setups, flip one side to the other side. And that would have been a pretty dramatic increase in manufacturing cost. So that's the reason why the blade is the same thickness or width all the way across. And that was set by the clevis on the master cylinder where it fits into. And that just happened to be slightly under 3/4 of an inch, and stock material comes at 3/4 of an inch. So I didn't have to hog off a half inch to get it down to the right thickness. So there are a lot of considerations other than function, manufacturability and things like that went into the analysis to get it where it was.
Yeah, I wouldn't have thought of that. Anything about the design of like the profile of the front of it. It feels pretty comfortable, I think, but it does. I don't know if maybe it's just perception, but it feels different than pulling a stock lever somehow. It feels to me more comfortable, but something about the profile or I don't know, maybe not.
Well, I think the knob on the end, just a little bit of a kick that's there. I would prefer not to have that, but the anti-rules exist. So I thought that I'd sell less if they didn't meet the requirements. So as far as how it fits, it was just a function of the angle that the lever is at when you squeeze it to the bar. So you've got a reach distance. That was the goal, was to have the same reach distance as the stock lever. So when you squeeze that to the bar, then you've got that stroke to deal with it that gives you the full disengagement. The knob on the end meant that I had to have a little bit more material right at the end, which meant I just got a little bit less throw, which reduced the force reduction. Those are the factors that went into the shape, is what's going to be strong enough, how thick can the lever be, or thin can the lever be. Originally, it just had that kick at the end. Then we had to add the knob. So the levers are very straight, basically, up until you get to the head end where it fits the clevis. And so it's just a function of where are the existing holes, where is the contact point, what is the angle, how much angle can I get on the end so that your finger doesn't just slip off the end. Because as you're squeezing, if your force is perpendicular to the surface, then it's not going to slide anywhere. But as the angle increases, now you got to not only squeeze, but you got to hold your lever in towards the center of the bike to maintain that. So it was a matter of cutting aluminum with a hacksaw and machining some pieces off manually, and then filing it down to shape. And that's how we made the prototypes, and made a few, took them to a race, and had some pros and some AA guys try them out, and seemed to be well received. So started making them, and the rest is history.
So that's pretty cool. I mean, direct rider feedback's always the way to go. I like that.
Yeah.
When did the brake lever come into play? I can't imagine that was from the get-go, but I can totally see how having matching levers is going to just feel better.
Yeah, we were selling the clutch lever before we started making the brake lever, and the brake was actually pretty simple because the goal wasn't to change things significantly. The biggest change is that I didn't like how much reach there was when you had adjusted the lever fully, and we're talking pre-2013 bikes. They had the forks that held the piston rod. So it was a matter of copying the head end and making a short lever and making it the same thickness like the clutch lever was, making it look similar. And because guys wanted to have matching levers. For me, the biggest improvement is that you can adjust it closer to the bar. You don't have to squeeze it all the way to the bar. The brake isn't like the clutch. It only needs a short amount of throw. The force to squeeze it isn't a big deal. I panic grab and go over the handlebars enough as it is. Didn't need to make it easier.
Yeah. I haven't tried the brake lever, but I'm encouraged to now, because I hadn't thought about it. Them kind of feeling the same might be kind of nice to get anal about stuff like that sometimes. So
it has more of a hook to it because so it's like you take the clutch lever and then about a half inch before the bend in the end of where the knob is, you add another bend. So that's the way it looks. It's very comfortable. It really promotes using one or two fingers because that hook is there and it's real comfortable. And because I think you can adjust it closer to the bar. Your finger isn't pointing straight out there. It's just relaxed and curved.
I have fairly short fingers, so I like that. And I always one finger the brake. If I grab it with more, I'm going over too. So
yeah,
it's funny.
So when I was on your website, I noticed that obviously most of the bikes that you make levers for are European bikes. I was wondering if you have plans to make more for the Japanese brands.
Yeah, we do have the Kawasaki clutch lever, and I was surprised. I thought that was going to take off like the KTM levers, but it hasn't. I don't know the dynamic of whether it's the quantity of bikes that are sold, or it just doesn't match the KTM, or whether the community is different. But they haven't sold dramatically enough to motivate me to get going on the other Honda and Yamaha bikes. But the plans are there. I've been building a shop and foolishly decided to do a bunch of the work myself, because I used to be a carpenter and I like doing that work and thought I could save some money, but I would have been a lot better off to have a developer just hand me keys when the place was done.
No kidding. I just did plumbing work and I regretted it almost immediately. So yeah, same thing.
It's fun. What I like about doing that is it makes it feel like it's my own. It's home. It's not something I knew I moved into, and it's not really mine.
Yeah.
Somehow spending that money doesn't do it. Doing the work makes it feel like it's mine.
I 100% relate to that point, except for the couple extra days of time that it took me that I should have been riding or whatever. But
right. Yeah.
Yeah, we had plans to ride the next morning. He was like, I can't. He sends me a picture of his yard all torn up and he's got a ditch witch out there. Like, well, we're not riding tomorrow.
The whole thing.
Yeah.
No.
I had a question about, because I've blown through a few clutches. We've had all kinds of clutch issues. I feel like a little bit of an expert on clutch plates, not from an engineering perspective, but using them and maintaining them. And I've noticed there's a lot of range of clutch springs, like the new KTM's got that Bellevue washer. And I noticed recently I bought an older 2-stroke. We got the CleverLever on both bikes. And the Pohl, even with the CleverLever, the Pohl on the 500 is quite a bit stiffer. And I think it's because of that Bellevue spring. I'm wondering if there's anything to the springs. Do you get into that at all? Do you care, or is that just?
Well, I did the thing with the old Yamahas all the time, where you take out a couple of springs, because here in Minnesota we're flatlanders. We don't have hill climbs. Gotcha. It's loamy dirt. It's you can cheat a bit. That
would make it a lot lighter, I would think, taking a spring or two out.
Yeah, you just got to take every other one, or an even number.
Right.
But the Belleville washer, you have to spec a washer that's going to fit, that's going to have a lighter, it's a thinner washer or something. That's about the only thing they can change other than the hardness of the steel. I haven't looked in to see what's available there, whether there's a range of springs available. I'd be surprised if there wasn't.
Hadn't thought about trying to change it. Interesting.
Yeah, and then there's, like I said, thickness is the main thing that gives you the stiffness. Right. So if you find a way to grind it down, flatten it out, I haven't looked at it to know what's possible, but that would be the parameter to change to get what you want.
With your lever, it's not bad. It's very rideable. I was just curious. It is stiffer than the springs in like the traditional springs I felt in other bikes. You may not know this. I don't know if it's in your area of expertise, but do you have any sense, just out of curiosity, for why they switched to that washer instead of the traditional 6 springs or whatever?
Yeah, manufacturing cost, 1 spring versus 6. And
so they got cheap on us, huh?
Yeah, probably. I would think that it would be harder to have a very smooth, straight action to the clutch pack. You want that to separate very parallel.
Right.
Or perpendicular, however you want to look at it.
I gotcha.
If the Belleville washer is a little bit out of whack, and we're talking thousands, I think it could have a significant effect on how much drags, which would mean how much separation distance you need to have. And if you need more separation distance, then you're going to have the effect at the lever, how much stroke in the lever you have. That's immaterial as far as the clutch and how my lever and how it works.
Sure.
And it's going to have a force reduction that's 50% because of the movement of the pivot to pivot distance was 50%.
Right.
And whatever the springs are putting in there, I'm not going to. If I could supply options, that would be a product to sell. But
well, the only reason I ask about it is because I first got into this on a beta, and I went to a Recluse clutch, and with Recluse that particular clutch kit, I did the core manual, and they've got a couple of different spring options, and I discovered that they're lighter than stock because they had more plates. I guess they have more surface, so they can get away with lighter springs. And that's where I first noticed a reduction in lever effort just from changing out the springs. And then, of course, we got into the CleverLever and then the Bellevue washer and all that. But that's what got me thinking about it. And the washer's annoying to me because I didn't think about trying to find lighter options. But like when I got the Recluse kit for that bike, you're reusing the stock washer. same lever effort, and there's no reduction in effort at all, and that was disappointing to me. So that's what I was kind of thinking.
Yeah, and some of with Recluse, you take out a plate to fit the clutch, the functional part in. So the amount of torque you can transmit through the clutch is dependent on the surface area and the force you're pushing them together.
Well, so I've always used the whole manual stack. I've never run. John had the auto clutch for a while, but I've never run that. But yeah, I see what you're saying.
He loves to say that.
I love that. Okay, the first time we went riding after he went to a full manual clutch, he's giggling in the radio. We run Senna's, and he's like, "I can pull a wheelie." So,
well, that's cool. My life. I've never. Do you still use a?
No, I only use that because it came on the bike that I bought when I bought a used bike, and it had it on it, and I was too cheap to. This is becoming a trending thing with me, but I was too cheap to change out and just add in a full clutch stack. So I kept it on there for, I don't know, maybe a year, and then it was probably longer than that. Swapped it out, but yeah, I much prefer the manual clutch.
Okay.
Well, yeah. I hadn't thought about how that would impact lever pull, though, because you're right. You'd have less clutch. You'd have to have stiffer springs, I guess, or something like that.
Right. To accommodate less surface area, the only part of the equation you can change is the force to push them together. So I've had a lot of guys say the Recluse clutch increased the pull, and my lever brings it back down to stock.
Gotcha.
Which is kind of disappointing, but it's better than having a harder pull. I don't know much about Recluse and which of their systems has a heavier pull, but some guys say that it's lighter, but it must be the.
I think it depends what you've put in there, because I got the full manual stack, and in that beta that I first did that on, they had, I want to say 12 friction plates instead of the 8 or 9 that were stock, so they added quite a bit of surface area. And because of that, the springs were noticeably lighter. It wasn't quite as much as your lever, but it was a lot easier to pull the lever stock. So that's an interesting piece.
So as somebody who's thought a lot about levers and all the things that go into it, do you have any thoughts on where, like, the angle that you should mount your levers at? We asked that question of at least a few pro riders at this point, and I'm getting the impression that they're not actually allowed to say that anything other than the stock bike is the right way to go.
That's the factory deal.
Yeah, they're like, I ride on the factory bike to show that it can be done, but that doesn't, in my mind, necessarily answer the question in the way that I was looking for an answer. So we've had a few different opinions on it. I was just wondering if you have any kind of thoughts on the angle that you should run your levers at.
Yeah, I think that is a preference position adjustment that people make. I find that when I used to sit down, when I first started riding, I needed them higher. Otherwise, you're lifting your wrists up and ankling them down. It's not ergonomically very nice. Right. So then when I started standing up, I started ankling them way down. And my buddy, who's much more experienced rider than I, would, turn them up, turn them down. You're always going too far. And so, yeah, I think it's what your preference is, and it depends on how you ride. Do you stand more than sit?
Right. Skill level definitely comes into it, because the better you are, the more you're standing, but the more you're back over the rear tire, and that makes your wrists straighter. So,
I mean, our working theory is that you should be relatively straight with where your arms are headed. So if you're sitting down, you want them up higher, like you were saying, and then as you stand more, you're gonna have to adjust them to your angle of it, approach angle or whatever.
I prefer to have them fairly angled down so that when I stand, it's comfortable, and when I'm sitting there, I don't mind angling my wrists as much. I think there's a effect on fatigue too, and that's probably what everybody's trying to get at with what's the ideal ergonomic arrangement of all the controls. So standing, that's when you're standing, you're the most aggressive position. Right. That's when you're probably trying the hardest. You've got the most effort going in. So I'd say that's why I like to have them down more, is to, so I don't burn energy more than I'd have to by having them tipped up, having a little bit less grip strength as I'm flying around the corners and over logs and things like that. One thing I wanted to mention about the force reduction that we kind of glossed over. I don't really advertise more than there's a force reduction because everybody can understand that real easily. But I think probably what may have a bigger effect is that when you're in a race, you're bombing down the trail, everything's feeling good. You've been riding for 10, 15 minutes and you're flying and you're comfortable. You clip a tree, you go down, suddenly you're exhausted. You got to pick up the bike. It's just immediate. That's the flood of adrenaline that's your whole body experienced when you went flying off the bike. Yep. And you can't avoid it. You can't control that. It just happens. When you're clutching, I think the same thing happens, but it's just happening in your forearm. You come up to a tense situation, a pile of rocks or something, and you tighten up. And then it's hard to get relaxed again after that. And the longer you stay tight and hanging on hard, the more fatigue you get. You build up adrenaline in your forearm. And so you get that adrenaline rush. You need air to burn or oxygen to burn off the adrenaline, and you have that fatigue. The way the lever interacts with that is not only is there a force reduction, but the lever is short. So when you squeeze it, you don't have to release and re-grab. Like you've got one finger on the lever, you release and re-grab because you're going to be hitting that pile of rocks and you want to hang on with your full grip. Mine, you just squeeze the lever to the bar, it passes past your fingers and you've automatically got your full grip on the bar. So I think that's depending on what you're riding and, if you're in a race or whether you ride aggressively all the time or not, that I think has a bigger effect than the force reduction. But it takes a little bit of a story to explain, so I don't bother trying.
I actually really like that. So John and I have a theory that there's a lot to be gleaned in terms of performance by going through your whole sort of setup and approach to riding and starting to eliminate all the little, like we call them little annoyances, but all the little things that cause small amounts of fatigue, exactly like what you're talking about. And if you can cut enough of those things, they add up to be significant. And now you're finishing races instead of getting tired halfway or whatever. It's right. I 100% agree with you. I think that's interesting.
You can stay more relaxed. When you're more relaxed, you can be more aggressive and faster.
Yeah, and I've noticed that after we took a little while to get used to the lever, I think both of us are more aggressive on the clutch, but far less tired by being that way. So we're all the way to the end of a longer ride, we're hitting the clutch hard, just like we would right out the gate. I think in years past, riding with stock levers, after a while out on the trail, you're tired and you get sloppy with the clutch and you're not really getting over obstacles the right way or anything. Your riding suffers significantly. And we stay aggressive on the clutch all the way through the day, and your arm's not falling off at the end. So you're still using the lever at the end of the day the way you were when you started, which I love. No,
then you have a full day of fun.
Exactly. 100%.
Are there any common misconceptions that you want to clear up? That, I mean, I can imagine, you deal with customer service, a lot of times there's I installed it wrong and there's a problem because of that. And then there's just, a misunderstanding in the way, the geometry or the physics of how the entire system works that are kind of different from the mechanical issues that could come up. Do you have any of those in mind that you'd like to talk about?
Yeah, and we've talked about most of them, hit or miss throughout the conversation, really. Yeah. But that is, you open up the package, don't set the instructions off to the side, read them. There is a full page explanation of the lever function on the website. There's a menu on the left, and at the bottom it's documents. Download is the page, and on there's a document called Understanding the MME Lever. And that goes through everything that we've talked about and then some, how and why the lever works the way it does and what you need to do to adjust it. The common misconception, I think, is, I've got drag, I've got slipping, I've got something, it's not adjusting right. I must need a different length piston rod. I must have gotten the wrong one or mine just needs a shorter one. And that's never the case. It's always, if the stock stuff doesn't work. I mean, my lever doesn't work. The piston rod that I provide, it's a maintenance issue. And, now I got more work to do. People don't like that. So they'd rather find a shorter thing. Well, it be something I can do. I shorten that piston rod or make it longer. I'll get more disengagement. And well, if you adjust it longer, you've accomplished the same thing without just getting a longer piston rod.
Right.
So following the instructions, understanding them to the best that you can is going to go a long way to get it adjusted right. And if you don't believe it, just do it anyway, and you'll find out.
So I think so for anybody who's running one of these clutches, like it works. I mean, that's been my experience. It works. If you can't get it to work, it's probably an adjustment issue that you can work on.
Right.
You didn't run it on the beta, right? So
I don't think so.
So far, we've only run them on KTMs, and everybody we've known has also run them on KTMs. Yeah. Devin had it on a KTM.
Right.
Is there any difference between 4 strokes and 2 strokes in this?
No.
Okay.
No, it's just a matter of how much throw you need to separate the clutch plates so they're not interfering with each other, which is drag. Mm-hmm. And that's a function of the geometry and the tolerance control that they have when they're making their parts. There was when the 350 first came out, the KTM 350. There was some tolerancing issues, that there's some variability, and about 20% of the bikes needed a different piston rod in order to work. It was the one that originally provided was too long, and that. So now there are comments out there on the internet, and people read that and they go, "Oh, I must need a shorter piston rod." Oh, yeah. Well, that was specific to the 350 back then, and that when they got control of their tolerances, then that issue went away. But I had redesigned that lever into the second version, and instead of using the stock piston rod, now I provided my own so I could have the control. And it's been that way ever since. I could probably go back to using the OEM piston rod if I made some geometry changes to the lever, but I'm probably not going to go there.
That's interesting.
It would just reduce the number of components and make it cheaper. But that there's a bunch of effort there for no real purpose.
Right. So when I first bought the first one, I looked at, is this going to fit the right bike or whatever? But then I pulled the one off my newer 500 and threw it on the old 300, and it worked fine. And I didn't even think about it until this conversation today that I guess they're the same. It works, so they must have been the same. But can you talk just a second about what range of bikes are applicable, and is there some point, some model year or something where you need to pay attention to getting a different one or something like that?
Well, that's a good point. Like I mentioned, the 350 right. bike back in 2015, 16. I don't remember the year they came out.
Yeah, I'm not sure either.
The new design works with it. The only issue that's come up is when you've had an older bike, a 250 or something, and you've taken that lever off and put it on a 350. So now the piston rod's too long for that particular bike. And like I said, it was a tolerance control issue. So there were about 20%, and I'm only guessing, I really don't know. About 20% of the bikes needed the shorter piston rod. And all I do is added a short one to it and said, if you have this bike, then use the short one. If you have any other bike, use the long one. If it's a Brembo and it's not a radial style, then my Brembo will fit it. I mean, there isn't... Gotcha. A whole range of differences. If it's a Magura, there's a Magura 1 and Magura 2. My lever will fit all those spikes that have the Magura. Of the KTM, GasGas, Husqvarna, Husaberg, TM, Sherco, I think that's all that I make. Oh, Kawasaki. And sometime soon, Honda and Yamaha.
Got it. Okay. I mean, that makes a lot of sense. It's been easy for me because I swapped it and then I bought a new one for the new bike anyway, and they all fit. So my experience has been good there. But I had a quick question on maintenance. We talked about this a little while back, but is there any lubrication that you should do to the clutch lever or the little piston that's up there, or any of that kind of stuff? In my experience, you risk just having dirt stick all over it. So I sometimes have and sometimes haven't. I don't know if you have advice there.
If you run sand a lot, then maybe it's better. It depends on what you're doing. Okay. If you run sand a lot, maybe it's better not to lubricate, so the more of the sand falls away. Yep. But you're always going to have fine grit getting in there, and maybe it's just a difference between 80 grit and 120 grit. I don't know.
Fair enough.
But if you're running swamp, then Yeah, grease the heck out of it.
Right. Seal
The swamp water isn't going to hurt it. Yeah. And it might, help it seal so there's water not going down into the piston area.
That makes a lot of sense. I put my handlebars in the dirt a lot. If I grease it up, it's just going to come away as a clump of dirt that stays there and grinds into it, I think. So.
Yeah. I haven't seen a lever wear more than usable.
Okay.
So because it's 3 points of contact, where you're pushing on the piston rod, you're pivoting around a point, and then you're pushing on the lever on the other end of the piston, basically. So the piston pushing on the end of the piston rod, the other end of the piston rod pushing on the lever, and the hole that it pivots about. If it gets sloppy, if you ever grab the lever and wiggle it and it's got more free play, if you dial out that free play, you're just fine tuning the adjustment.
Gotcha.
So there would be a point at which you'd have so much slop that you're actually losing the stroke.
Well, I actually had that by accident. I'll tell that story in a second.
Okay, well there you would need to replace parts, and it'd be the pivot bolt and the hole in the lever. So it'd be a whole new lever.
That's the pivot point is actually what I was thinking about potentially greasing. But what I did when I swapped the lever back and forth between the bikes is I somehow. I guess I dropped out that there's like a spacer ring that goes around. And
bushing.
I lost that, and I had it in there with just the screw. Didn't realize it, and it wouldn't work consistently. What the heck is going on? I'd pull it sometimes, it'd be fine, and finally pulled it apart and realized it's because you've got, I don't know, whatever, the 1/4 inch or something of like play on the screw without that bushing in there. So just a note to people who, if you've got that issue, maybe check the bushing.
Right.
It's easy to lose.
It is, yeah.
All right, we're running out of time.
One quick question. So,
okay.
John's got a note on here that you make a chainsaw mount. I've always thought those were fascinating.
Gonna be my
Never
next
used
question.
one. Oh, okay. We think alike.
Well, we don't live in a very wooded area, so we don't do trail clearing.
Right. Not much.
Yeah.
But I'm curious. What's that?
Yeah, we, my buddy and I have done a lot of trail work, and we've hauled our kids around, and they'd be taking the sticks we're cutting down little trees and make teepees out of them all over the places. They'd following us around while we're clearing trail, and to carry something around in a backpack, it sucks and is dangerous. Fall off and land on that bar. It wouldn't be pleasant, especially if you didn't have the cover on the bar. So we just always wanted something easier to do, and we decided to try it, and just came up with a nice clamp design so you don't pull it out of a scabbard. You don't have bungee straps that you got to hook up, and so you just flip a latch, pull it off, go cut, slap it back on. And it holds strong enough, stronger than bungees, that you can blast through the whoops and it stays on just fine.
Yes.
I got taken out by a root going crosswise to the trail and slammed the triple clamps into a tree with a saw on there. Bent the heck out of the chainsaw mount, but it still hung onto the chainsaw. Wrecked the chainsaw. I had a new carburetor, new cover. But my buddy sells that through my website. And we don't sell them for much of a margin. We more do it to promote trail maintenance. Trail work isn't much fun. And, we wanted to make it as fun as possible. So when you're riding between trees, you don't have the backpack with the chainsaw in it. You can ride hard and have fun. And then when you get there, cut the tree out. We've got people out west, especially where you ride between gas stops, and you got to decide whether you reach your halfway point on your gas tank. Do I turn around now and go, or do I go another 5 miles, run into a nasty landslide of trees and can't get through with the little handsaw? So now you're going to be walking. And so we've got people that buy them and ride with them all the time.
Just in case.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Yeah, it's desert here and like open forest. We really don't hit a lot of that, but I could definitely see the use case. It's interesting.
Oh.
Do you want to talk about where people can go to buy a CleverLever? I know that you have a website, but are you on Amazon or any of the other e-commerce sites?
Yeah, no, I'm not. I do sell through dealers. Slavens is one. I don't have a lot of dealers, but that you can find out who in your area. I don't even list them on my website. I sell primarily word of mouth. I'm not interested in running a big company. I like the personal contact too much. I don't want to manage people. I want to manage customers more. And the living is comfortable from what we've got going. It's all word of mouth. You go to a race, you show your levers to a buddy, and they say, "Wow!" And if I go to a race and show them, "Hey, you got to check out my levers here." "Oh, you make those? Okay. You're trying to sell me something. I'll see you later. I got to get ready for a race." But I've never seen a blip in social media attempts. I've had some major magazines do a full page picture ad type of thing and do the targeted advertising, and didn't see an effect. It wasn't measurable. The only measurable one was the Australian guys, the cross training enduro.
Yep.
I love
that was that was a good blip, and they've done some great videos with the chainsaw mount being silly.
Oh, I didn't know they were using yours. I've seen their video on the lever years ago, but interesting.
Okay. Yeah, check it out. The guys, they mounted on a guy's bike, and he takes the popcorn that that was in the box and makes two big false teeth in the front, like a beaver teeth, and talks about if your chainsaw gets dull, then just use these popcorn pieces and chew through the wood. and then probably the funniest is he's riding down the trail, and they're apologizing for his behavior because it was a 98-degree day or something, and he's too hot to ride with pants on, so he has underwear and chaps.
That's great.
Those guys are hysterical. Yeah, I love that.
But that year, my sales jumped a good chunk, and that's predominantly where people hear about it to this day, and that was done 10 years ago.
I think the word of mouth thing, you're definitely onto something. I mean, that's how we found out about it, is we ride with a guy, and he at some point was like, "You got to try this CleverLever," and okay, let me feel yours. And just now we have 3 of them. So
yeah.
And you had mentioned that you were surprised that it took so long for you to find out about them. Well, that's why. I didn't really want to get overwhelmed with. I wanted to control the growth, and it's grown at 30% a year up until this year. We're going to have a little bit of we'll probably have a 8% difference between last year and this year. I hate to say it, but I'd do COVID all over again, guys.
I've never ridden more.
Oh, I hear you. Yeah, everyone went outside for the first time ever.
Yeah. Well, the guys are at home. They're laid off, or not laid off. They're at home quarantining, and
right.
The government's sending them money, and they're spending it on their bikes. And if you're closer than 6 feet riding a bike, you're in trouble anyway. So it's naturally distancing,
Yep. We lived that for sure. So yeah, definitely hear you.
The one other cool thing that I noticed was your warranty that I think would be cool to talk about a little bit, because it seems like a nice touch. It just seemed like you'd pretty much replace it if anybody had a problem. But I don't know if you want to mention that.
Sure. And it's not so much a replacement warranty. I mean, certainly I'd work with the customer. It's more a satisfaction guarantee. If I encourage people to try it. If they have a question about whether or not it works for them, try it. If you have a defect in satisfaction, then you can return it for a refund. And you can do that for a year. Now, the goal isn't to have a lever for 6 months and then say, I'm getting a different bike and I don't need this one anymore. I want a new one. Here, I don't need it anymore. Sure. Give me a refund. But, it must be returned in new condition. And, so, the warranty's good, encouraging people to give it a try. And generally they find out that they like it.
I like that.
Yeah, I don't think I'll be returning mine anytime soon.
At this point, I couldn't ride without it. I don't think I have the arm strength left to. I'm giving up those
10 minutes.
Yeah.
I hear you.
Oh man.
Well, this has been a ton of fun. We super appreciate you coming on. We love these conversations, and we appreciate you taking a few minutes out of your day to come chat with us. So thanks a ton.
Well, thank you for having me.
Yeah, no problem. We'll get this shipped off to our editor, and we'll get you. We'll make sure we let you know once it's ready to go and we get it posted, and you can link it out to whoever if that's useful to you. But yeah,
absolutely.
We'll link the website too in the show notes when we put it up. So
great. I look forward to seeing it.
Cool.
Thanks, Tom.
Thank you.
Take care, guys.
Yeah, you too.
We'll see you.
This was super cool. I super appreciate Steve coming on because I think it's always really interesting to understand the engineering behind the products that we're using. So the smart carb and the CleverLever now, and I think we're going to do more of these. Suspension work, like it's good to know what you're talking about.
Having started a company and building a product and putting it out there on the market, you start to realize how big of a story there is behind the simplest of things. And maybe we're the only people that appreciate that story, but
that's why I feel like our podcast. If you don't like it, run your own.
Well, I mean, it's really interesting to know, like, hey, I had a problem, I had the solution, or I had the skill sets for it, and then I brought all the pieces together, and now we have this really cool thing that reduces the clutch pull by 50%, or it just makes so much easier. Like I mentioned.
Sorry. Well, I was just gonna say, what I think is interesting is that he was because I can relate, or we can relate, is that he was actually interested in starting a product company for dirt biking. I'm assuming for dirt biking, and then found a really cool solution. And I think it's interesting how people come into the market, because there are some people who build something and then realize they can sell it, or want to find something they can sell and sort of do the product hunt. But I think in both cases, the really cool products come from a really interesting pain point that you experience riding. And whether you went hunting for it or you found it by accident, it's a pain point use case that sort of drives the best products.
Yeah, I mean, it's like any niche market. When you get into it deep enough, you start seeing the gaps, and you're like, wow, I can solve that problem. And then 3 years later, and countless dollars and time and love and sweat and blood and tears, you have a product and people start buying it. And
so speaking of products, we make chin mounts. We do not sell them in red. I don't know why I still have this on my wall. But we make chin mounts for GoPros and other action cameras. They're super cool. Our editor tells us not to talk too much about them because we talk too much, not because our mount information is too much. Whatever. Anyway, links in the description. Go there, buy a chin mount. Like and subscribe, because we've got a whole series of these podcasts to come out like once a month-ish, and we've got more coming and lots more cool guests. Go back and check out all the old episodes. We're at, 14 you're saying?
15. This 15? Is 15.
Very cool. So you are going to learn a bunch about racers and products, and we love talking to these folks. And if you have tips or ideas about who we should go and interview, drop a note in the comments below and let us know who you'd like to hear from, and we'll see if we can get them on the show. And with that, we're out. We've got other stuff to do, so peace.